Bona tarda, ara sí. Thank you very much and welcome back. I'm sure that we all have renovated energy now for the second panel, which will talk about security, but from a different point of view. I think we are going to talk to a different security. We're going to talk about the security or the challenges, the security challenges for research, for knowledge, for the information, for data. So we're going to have also two very different perspectives, and I think that this will be a great conversation. I think that it's important to understand, and it was clearly stated in the first round of talks that we already had, that historically development in science and technology has really transformed conflict, and that's exactly the same now with hybrid threats. We've seen, we are more aware every time that with every vulnerability comes a new threat. We have this feeling of being vulnerable, and this goes from cyberattacks to economic coercion to psychological warfare, for instance. We talk about cognitive warfare, to sabotage of critical infrastructures. So I think it's hard to ignore that how the situation has shifted. So if we read the news, if we read every analysis lately, we know, we are well aware that everything can be weaponized lately. Even thoughts, even knowledge, even data, even people can be weaponized. So let's talk about these hybrid, these gray zones now for security, how this affects the knowledge production, the research, the innovation, the relation also between university, companies, governments, how to protect, how to not only protect research, but protect the freedom of speech and protect also the private and public initiatives. So that's part of the conversation that we're going to have now. We're going to talk about how this increasing geopolitical polarization is challenging the EU and the US and the international scientific cooperation, but also how the ability to alter information and data that are decisive, in fact, for obtaining the power, also poses a threat for democratic processes. So how can we prepare for cognitive wars when the territory to conquer is not physical, but people's mind? And that's what we're going to talk with our two guests now. So to discuss about this strategic value of knowledge, we have Zach Carwile. He's an associate director of the Research and Innovation Security and Competitiveness Institute at the Texas A&M University System. He works at the intersection of academia, industry, and government to strengthen research security practices. Welcome.
Thank you.
And to know more also about these hybrid threats and how to counter them, we have a specialist. We have Dr. Hanna Smith. She is a senior strategic advisor to the Secretary General of the OSCE, but just for a few days. I have to say that she is coming to the other side, to academia, back again. She will be at the Vasa University in Finland, and she's also an associate professor at the College of Europe in Belgium. So thank you very much to both of you for being here. But I think I will start with Zach, and I will start with the most probably practical and logical question. If you can explain what do we understand, what do we mean when we talk about research security, and how these have become so important now in the security agenda? What is the difference between this research security and the traditional espionage that we have seen always in recent history?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, thank you all for hosting us in this beautiful building in your beautiful city. It's been a great opportunity, and I appreciate that. So research security, I guess we could just say, we could start with these are kind of the measures that institutions, governments, societies can use to prevent the misappropriation of research data, research outputs, when that misappropriation of that data can be expected to potentially impact national security of a nation, economic security, the research integrity, the system of research integrity, and potentially even manifests itself in foreign interference or foreign influence in research. That's kind of a derived definition from what the US government calls research security. The EU Commission for Counterproliferation, and I forget the full name of the committee. In 2024, they kind of took it a little bit further. I like the EU definition a little bit better, and I'll tell you why. So the EU definition kind of tracks along what we'd already talked about, you know, protecting that research from being misappropriated or being influenced unfairly. But the EU definition, it kind of puts a couple of other tags on research security, tags like responsible internationalization or, you know, responsible knowledge transfer, things like that. And then the EU definition also adds a very important component, which is its efforts taken by government and institutions to protect that research. And that's a very important component to that because it is a team sport in whatever country you're in. Institutions rely on their governing bodies and their government to kind of help them protect what's important, to know what needs to be protected, and then to work with their government partners to protect that data, or you know, whether it's export control data or other means of control data. So it's a team sport in research security.
Well, Zach already talked about this knowledge security. This is how the European Union calls it. But how vulnerable is the EU in that sector? And what are the threats? Who are the actors posing threats to this knowledge security?
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Carme. Thank you, and thank for the organizers for inviting me here. I'm just doing a slight disclaimer because the reason really I am here is none of those titles that were mentioned.
Thank you.
I used to be between 2017 and 2022 research director at the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. Mm-hmm. So that was the time when really the hybrid threat concept penetrated into the EU discussion and how it kind of developed and continued. And now when I jump back to the academia, it's going to be preparedness and resilience, which is kind of the continuation. So just to mention that, since there can be a deceiving aspects relating to the titles. Yes, and thank you for your question related to this EU and the vulnerability part, or European. When it comes to this specifically on knowledge security, which is one of those perhaps emerging security domains in a discussion, we have not really thought about it, that academia would be full of threats somehow, or even during our schooling, we would face that. I would almost call kind of the post-Cold War era starting like an age of openness, on an age of transparency, because that was almost the idea. A little bit the same way than the first panel was discussing the defense aspects on how to cooperate, how to do things. Let's be as open as possible and transparent as possible, and therefore we will not necessarily see the threats and the risks the same way. There is a conflict prevention is almost part of that. And that came also to knowledge exchange. That's what we talked about before, knowledge exchange, not knowledge security. And now, suddenly, perhaps together with the age of openness, that was a little bit of age of innocence as well. Because we did not necessarily think that that type of approach, someone would use that perhaps against us. And that's where it comes from, this kind of the threat analysis going together with the vulnerabilities. And this whole kind of thing, it's a little bit difficult to say where are we now, because now it is again in the EU's agenda. It is kind of the protection relating to, for example, curriculums, clearly, is one of those things. Not only how you protect universities from the cyber attacks, because there's been incident in Netherlands, where actually a cyber attack from the towards technical university not only interrupted the university system, but also the exam time. So that was almost like a dual use cyber attack in the way that to interrupt the systems, do that, but cognitively to play with the minds of the students and the results as well. And then, of course, it was relating to semiconductors and so on. So this is kind of a, we have lots of activity in that area. And the two biggest culprits in the bloc, they have been China and Russia, although very, very different approaches from their side. But not only those two. There are also other more non-state actor-likes who want to try to undermine our knowledge and play with it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, to both of you, what is the line between management, the risk, and the freedom of academia?
Okay, thanks. Collaboration is the absolute lifeblood of academia, and research teams don't make the strides that we've had, in medicine, in technology. Those advances aren't made by siloed teams. So collaboration within multiple teams in multiple countries is vital to academia. And you may ask, why is research security a transatlantic issue? Well, the research enterprise, again, spans the entire world, and the United States and its NATO allies are very strong collaborators in research, both military-focused, but also in biotech, semiconductors, as Hanna mentioned, and several other critical technologies. So collaboration is a must, and so the balance is how do we look at managing those collaborations a bit more efficiently, a bit smarter, if you will. How do we identify potential risks before those risks occur or before we enter into certain collaborative relationships with other research entities or researchers? And then how do we manage those collaborations through the life of the project?
Yeah, I very much kind of agree here. The whole kind of research and innovation ecosystem is very complex, and it has a lot of different bits and pieces. When we see development in research and innovations, they always come from a rather free kind of platforms, free thinking, creativeness. We actually know that, for example, Soviet Union's one huge weakness was that they started to lose creativity due to the kind of the system and the very kind of narrow concentration onto the military side that this needs to be done. So there wasn't possibilities of using creativity, which comes then to the markets first and then perhaps used in the security side. So it is vital that it is open, transparent, not to be meddled with, so to speak. The system has to handle it, but then comes exactly that point that Zach mentioned here, is the fact that to start to identify from one innovation that, okay, our thinking needs to go in the way that there can be lots of benefits in this one, but there might be also some risks. And that's perhaps the moment where we need to get a little bit better, is to, when we do things, to identify both the possibilities and the risk, and then try to mitigate the risk and maximize the possibilities.
Is it the same? And because I'm talking about this blur line sometimes between what is interference, what is protection. We were talking about foreign actors, but also can there be some kind of stress between academia, companies, private companies, and also what the government expects from the research sector?
Yes, there can be that inherent stress. And I think with private companies, I think you see a little bit more they're going to lean a little bit harder or further in the direction of security, right? Because that is their profit. That is their bottom line, that they need to protect their intellectual property, their trade secrets. Whereas in academia, generally over the last, since World War II, the last 50 or 60 years, there's been a huge emphasis on fundamental research. In the United States, in the mid-80s, in the Reagan administration, the administration published National Security Directive 189, NSD 189, that essentially clearly defined or attempted to define the difference between what fundamental research should be and applied, I think, research at the time. And then the research that would fall on the side of the fundamental, the side of the fence that was fundamental, there would be no restrictions on publications, discussions at conferences, et cetera, or sharing. But I think what you find is now that line has gotten a little blurry, and there within this, quote, fundamental research area, there are many technologies, a lot of research that's what they call dual use. And so, I may be a researcher that's being funded to work on something here that I consider to be fundamental, but potentially could be taking us down the road for a cure for cancer. Perhaps one of the strategic competitors of my country might be able to take that same technology and apply it in an area or a field that is not what it was the intent of me, the researcher, or my funder. It may also fall fly in the face, rather, of my nation's national security interests. They may use it in a weapons platform or system that might target us one day, or they may use this technology to persecute their own citizens, again, not within the national security interest of my nation. So that's where a government might come in, step in, and say, we need to look at how we're doing these collaborations and look at maybe controlling the dissemination of that research.
Yeah, because I was thinking, as an example, what has happened with Anthropic, for instance, in the US. To what extent, well, a company decides or wants to decide or want to draw a red line about what is the use that the government can give to that technology. That would be also part of this strain, I guess.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So then, and in Europe, this balance, they always, I think this is the debate. We have been researching on disinformation for years already, and cyber threats, this idea of the challenge for the European Union on how to counter without stop being open. That's the challenge for democracies, in fact, because what is at risk is the openness of the societies and in the measures you take. So where is this balance? How is this being also protected? Because I think that's my personal point of view, but I think that we also see how this tension is coming to Europe, for instance, on freedom of speech, on this struggle between regulation and freedom of speech. And also we see how some, especially political parties, are buying some approach to what freedom of speech is, more approach to the First Amendment than the traditional way of understanding that in Europe. So where are we now in the European Union in all this struggle?
Okay, where are we now? I'm not 100% sure that I can answer fully to that, but I think that you raised an important, the question of balance. Because when our environment is threatening, there is a lot of uncertainties. We start kind of feeling that we need to react. The famous saying that, when you have threat, there are three kind of responses. Either you attack, you froze, or you run away. So, and none of those are the right answers for that kind of circumstances. And usually they are kind of very quick ones. And the same goes now here to countering we're trying to quickly find, for example, technological answers. The governments are saying we need to put money now onto this and this innovation. We are behind China on this and that, and Russia is developing drone, whatever, now let's go there. Fine, all of that needs to be there, but the balance aspect is that actually the resilience of the society comes, the ground base of the resilience of the society comes from somewhere else than from those solutions. That comes from the people. And things like history, cultural studies, religion studies, all of that understanding, I thought that the first panel highlighted really well of the situation that if we actually do not know our history, where things are coming from, how they were built, for what kind of a time, why, what are behind certain decisions, then that can be misused. And that can be misused to polarize us, unhealthy way. It's good to have debate, it's good to not to think the same way, but if it becomes an unhealthy polarization, then that's not good. And if we also lose our own roots, where we come from, what is the thing that we hold dear, and those subjects are something totally else than cyber protection or critical infrastructure protection and so on. So I think the balance when we are finding solutions, identifying risks and trying to kind of be prepared, then we also would need to think about it, that there are those who want to mess up basically with our minds. And specifically from the European perspective, I don't know, might be an American also, if the roots will be lost and you do not know your history, we will be easy targets.
Yeah, because one thing that we have seen also at EU level is the difference on risk assessment among member states, for instance, and public opinions.
Yeah, and quite often that is also, you know, the kind of traffic lights. There is a green and yellow and red, and they are very much technical also, because it's nearly impossible to measure what's the level of knowledge of your own history among your people. How would you measure that? Yes, in a school, some ways out of that, but still, because it depends on, then you would need to look at curriculums and all of it. So that's kind of the interesting part, that when you do vulnerability assessments, first of all, it is you who are doing it to yourself often. It is not necessarily put equal to the threat assessment. So what is the threat? Because the threat often actually translates onto where are the vulnerabilities. You might have a rubbish internet, but it wouldn't necessarily be a problem if someone would not use it against you, almost, because people adapt quite well. So that to me is that the risk assessments need to be more holistic, look at almost like a risk assessment ecosystem, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me just push a little bit on this idea, because that's true, but what we see is that it's not that easy to find also the consensus internally in the European Union. And now I'm thinking on the AI Act, on the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a hard piece of legislation that is based on value risk assessment, and they are pushing, delaying the application of the legislation because it's so hard then to put that into practice. How are you going to decide? Who is going to decide where are the risks and who is going to measure that?
Well, that to me, if that's, perhaps you want to say something about that too, but that to me is, again, one of those things that when you have something new, you don't know, it's developing fast all the time. You don't know exactly what are the effects to the society. So even if we want to see quickly answers, quickly building the kind of resilience, perhaps sometimes it is smarter to take a little bit longer to try to assess exactly that more holistic way of looking at it and to find the right rules, because everywhere is always the right rules. Either you can try to control, or then you give rules of behavior, so to speak. And again, to find the balance between those control and rules for engagement. That is a really important one, and EU has been rather good on that one. Not flawless, but better than many other actors in the world.
Zach, you were explaining at the beginning what research in security means, but I would like you, if you can explain, how do you think that this will evolve? So if you had to try to spot what are the biggest challenges that this will get in the next 10 years because of the technological change, because of AI, quantum computing, or whatever, where can you think that the main threats will be in this research?
So I tend to look at, so the US government publishes annually what they call a critical and emerging technology list, which could be debated as to whether or not that's accurate, or it gets debated, I know, among a lot of the principal investigators that I meet with. But things like AI, quantum, hypersonics, semiconductors, et cetera, are kind of on that list. So as the threats and the risk emerge to research security, I think you're going to see efforts by strategic competitors to target. In my view, you're going to see to have more robust targeting of those critical emerging technologies, and then if it were me, you certainly have to look at, there are certain bad actors that are a list of known suspects, we'll say. So the US government and the funding agencies, they have what they call are their 4 countries of concern, which are China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I will tell you that in my dealings and interactions, we work with a lot of institutions and government officials in the EU as well. A lot of engagement with our colleagues in Germany, in the Netherlands, especially on the issue of research security. And I can tell you that they view China as the #1 risk, their research security risk in their country as well. And so what I see as the future is how does China adapt to some of the measures that institutions put in place to protect their research, because it has gone from what you might think of as traditional espionage or industrial espionage to concepts like what are called the non-traditional collectors, which are maybe postdocs, PhD students, visiting scholars coming in, conferences, inviting professors to conferences, hosting what are known as predatory journals for publications. And all of these techniques have evolved as institutions that have been targeted have applied measures to protect their research, either through the due diligence review processes or by taking account and asking their researchers to disclose potential conflicts of interest or commitment. So the techniques from these countries of concern, I think, are going to evolve in ways we haven't yet seen, as they would in any sort of a traditional espionage, intelligence operation that was targeting to steal classified secrets or classified information.
And from the EU point of view, or in Europe, what are these main threats? How do we think that these threats will evolve in the coming years?
Yes, a good question, because exactly this, how things are going to evolve is probably the key question in general terms, that who catches up whom and who's the next one who needs to catch up whom, because that's how basically the international politics has always kind of gone, looking at the strengths and how do you strengthen your strengths and how do you try to get rid of your vulnerabilities, and if you are on the other side, how do you reduce the other's strengths and hit the vulnerabilities. So this game probably will continue quite a bit. I would say that, at least in Russia's case, we will see quite a bit on the military side challenges, because that's the one that they are strengthening now. So prior to 2022, we saw all kind of activities going on, which really went through exactly these cultural aspects, much more devious information aspects, I would say. Even kind of how using religion in that way, how to use diplomatic relations, economic relations, and so on. Now the tools are more in the security, intel, military side. That we have seen. But that probably is a development from that side. And how they can catch up again to the kind of positive side, but interference still is a big question to me. Now we're going to see the hard security side from their side. How do we see that from other actors? I cannot say anything about Iran or North Korea as such, but with the Chinese case, it's also really interesting because they need to really evaluate the situation now. That where we are, how much they can possibly start asking the payback time from certain places, or are they actually just watching and seeing where it kind of develops and therefore we don't see too much. So that would be I think we are entering to some kind of a slight change of dynamics of the activities that we've seen, specifically what we call in the European side, the hybrid threat activities. So changing dynamics from the Russian side, most likely changing dynamics from the Chinese side.
Mm-hmm. And you've been, as you already mentioned, in the Center of Excellence for Hybrid Threats, also OSCE, but also academia. So what are the biggest coordination gaps for resilience that you have identified so far?
Okay. Well, I'll start from the easiest one, and that's the language. So exactly this, if now European Union is using mostly almost kind of knowledge security, and if in the US side it's a research security, the concept that it's there. It's already two different concepts, even if they're talking about the similarities or similar things. But that, if we're talking about coordination of the things, same was with the hybrid threats. European Union took the hybrid threats, NATO used hybrid warfare quite a bit, but then US had a very difficulties using those, so it went to the gray zone activity, malign interference, things like that. So we have many different types of concepts. Even then inside of the EU, countries use different things. And that complicates the cooperation massively. Because if your official documents state some kind of a thing and then there is a little bit differences on the kind of definition and the conceptual basis, it might be difficult. So that's one thing. I suppose the second easy one is to say that if you have a class, that how exchanging classified information will happen. Everybody has been kind of practicing it a bit, but it's still difficult. Very difficult. There are reasons for that, how intel services cooperate together, and that's kind of probably the hardest, it's the easiest thing to tell, but it's one of those hardest things to kind of correct. A lot of things have gone forward since 2017, for example, when I really kind of started to look into the whole thing. It's incredible how basically the EU has come up with the cyber diplomacy toolbox and the foreign information manipulation
information manipulation and interference.
FIMI.
FIMI.
Yes. So even that toolbox and the understanding of how the information is used, and so in critical infrastructure protection, far, sometimes perhaps even too far on the kind of the normative part there. But the understanding of threats, the changing dynamic on our security environment, all of that has gone better. But there are still mechanisms, because we are rules-based societies, rules-based and trust-based. And that's the thing. When someone has a responsibility of taking care of this own part, and the other one, that one, everything works when you can trust that everybody takes care of their things, you have your responsibilities and so on. But when this is smashed, or you need to start thinking this holistic. It sounds easy when I'm talking about ecosystem and holistic way of thinking. It's not. In putting into a practice. And I think here we have the most biggest difficulties. Sectoral-wise, we have got quite good already. But then this kind of transatlantic cooperation, or even inside of the EU in different countries, that the linguistic part, understanding the conceptual parts, and then, of course, to change really certain information that we know is hard.
Can I add to that just a little bit?
Sure.
So I think one of the coordination challenges currently between the U.S. and the transatlantic partners is really deciding who are the bad actors specifically. You have various sanctions lists in the United States that may or may not dovetail with sanctioned entities in Europe. You have within the United States, Department of Defense has very strict rules and lists of entities that cooperate directly with the Chinese military. And if you want to apply for a DoD research grant, you can't have any affiliation with those entities. And I think it would be better if the governments kind of coordinate a little bit better, whether it's sharing intelligence further or more diplomatic interaction on who really are the entities that we need to be concerned about when it comes to misappropriating, stealing our defense data or our economic data, our trade secrets, and then aligning those, because it makes it a lot easier then on the institutions who want to collaborate, let's say in Spain and the United States, if all of a sudden one of these is involved with a company that the other country considers a sanctioned entity, then it gets a lot more complicated, and it may actually get in the way of that collaboration occurring. So I think just a little bit better coordination on what entities, what external entities really are of concern.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a big presence of university and academia, so I think I will open the floor to the questions. That's great. We already have a couple and three even. The microphone is coming. Yes, there.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm a content creator on EU Affairs. My name is Piel Medina. And well, my question is more related to disinformation, because I think that nowadays it's like one of the most pressing issues, as it poisons actually our democracies. So I think that the main question that comes to my mind is, how can we protect our democratic systems and our citizens from disinformation, but without potentially harming the freedom of speech?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Answer?
Yes, we can
Yeah,
answer
okay.
later.
Very good question. Thank you very much. Because I happen to belong probably to the side who is saying that the information domain that we have nowadays, or information environment we have, it's going to be with us. We cannot fight against that in the way that with the control. At least in the control to say that who can post some, I mean, who can set up a web page, or who can do a social media thing, who can be in the social media and so on. I think that would be really, really difficult to do. So the two things that to me is important when talking about protecting the democracy or something, I wouldn't even call it that this is poisoning democracy, because it depends on, democracy is a weird system in the way that it is exactly as bad as we make it or as good as we make it. So it depends on those who are using the information, interpreting the information, and here comes the education part. That's why I was calling this knowledge of history and knowledge of culture things and whatever. And also, of course, the free academic spirit that should be critical, which I don't quite understand why it has disappeared, that when you see an X post or something, you go, oh yeah, that's how it is. And not the first, hold on a second, that's a social media post that looks, kind of like someone is putting their opinion into it. Can it be right? Has he or she checked this and that? Why is it posting exactly that information? So for our approach to be able to be critical on the information that we see, that is a central point of actually maintaining the democracy and the strength of it. And the second one is the, I would say, not control, but rules of engagement or rules of behavior. Because really, face-to-face, people are not saying to each other those things that they are sometimes doing in the social media, for example. So to me, that is one of those things that there has to be some kind of a rule of an engagement of what you cannot run on a street, suddenly throw your clothes away and start kind of insulting everybody. Then police comes and arrests you and says, that's not the way how you do. Or in a school, you suddenly jump onto your table and start dancing and singing and whatever. Then what? No. Then teacher takes you away. That's not how you behave. But that's not a limit of freedom of expression or speech. That's a rule of behavior. So for me, those two, the kind of the critical assessment of any information you see, enough own knowledge to be able to start kind of putting into it context, and then rule of engagements.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a very interesting debate, the one on anonymity, because the account can be anonymous, but there has to be someone responsible for that behind. And the platforms should know, and that's a thing. And if I can add, it's very interesting to see how the EU approach has been evolving these years, because at the beginning, all the measures were related to content curation, content control, and they realized that at the end of the day, this comes into a problem with freedom of speech. And now they never talk about the content, they talk about the behavior of the content. The problem is not the content itself from a philosophical point of view. I mean, we all have the right to lie. The problem is the capacity to spread that content. And here is where the algorithm comes into the picture, and this is where we have the Digital Service Act, and there is a legislation to put control on the algorithm, and this is part of the tension that we have, the transatlantic tension that we have with the technological platforms, because this need to regulate the algorithm, to put transparency in the algorithms, because the problem is the capacity to spread, from my point of view. Yeah. Teníem dues més allà darrere i després...
Hi, this is Carlos from Catalan Agency of Cybersecurity and our University of Barcelona. Carmen was mentioning before the AI Act, and I would like to focus on the Cybersecurity Act that I think was a couple of months ago. A new reform was proposed by the European Commission to target what they call the high-risk suppliers in the supply chain from the technological perspective. So basically it means that they are like targeting Huawei and ZTE. and they want to ban them from the supply chain. Also, I think 2 days ago, from the U.S. perspective, the FCC authority was banning all those routers that were not strictly or entirely fabricated in the U.S. That it turns out that there is there's no any router that fulfills that requirement. But in the end, what's your opinion on that sovereignty that the European Union, that technological sovereignty that the European Union is looking for? Is ready to take that step? If not, when do you think we will be able to get rid of that suppliers that are perceived as interferences or foreign threats? Thank you.
So I missed at the very beginning. Did you say that the EU was looking at banning them, or
Yeah.
Okay? Well, first of all, I agree with that assessment. I obviously, countries and/or institutions, they should be able to make whatever decisions they want to make about their infrastructure, what they're investing in. However, the consequence of that then is how does that limit that country or that institution and their ability to collaborate, integrate into a larger network, work with another nation that doesn't trust that equipment or has specific concerns. You know, my Pollyannish view of that is, if my friend wants to make a bad decision and I have information about why that's a bad decision, I would hope I would share that to the best of my ability. And obviously we're talking about, you know, levels of classified information, but share with my friend why I think that's a bad decision, so that they have all the information they need to make an intelligent decision for them. So for countries, institutions, I think when we're talking about Huawei ZTE, I think you're weighing the cost of purchasing and integrating that equipment onto your network against the cost of what you're potentially going to lose down the road, and the ability to work with other countries, work with other businesses, if it's a business, work with other institutions. Because, you know, I'm personally not going to be comfortable allowing a university that's using equipment by a company that we you know, at A&M, that's banned. We can't use either one of those. So I'm not going to be comfortable allowing an institution to host my information on their networks if they're utilizing equipment and/or services from a company that I view as a threat.
I think that there would be kind of 2 points from my view. One is that it is now in line with this change of dynamics. The idea that, you know, let's do the maximalization of interdependence or globalization aspect, to the fact that let's look at as kind of sovereign aspect, do it on own equipment. Which one is the better system? Difficult to say, because both have their caveats then. So, but it is to do with that part. I obviously agree that anyone has their own right to choose whatever they do, but at the same time, I'm calling again the context and why this is happening, specifically if we start kind of criticizing it and saying, you know, why are we doing this and that, because then it's anyway going to change. So these are usually based on a threat assessment. And there are certain kind of a long-term evaluations as well, which might be to do with we are supporting our own companies. Perhaps there is the long-term assessment in the way that who would be our friends eventually, and who we, even if we start doing business, we'll still keep a little bit away. So it is very rare that it's kind of like, okay, now because of the situation we are going to do this kind of change. So these two go together now. The big change of dynamics, but my understanding and guess is that it is to do with also a threat assessment, and that's why it is a necessity.
There was a lady there behind, not anymore. Okay, then here in the front row.
Yes, I'm Arnau Brasó. I was a student at the Bay, and now I'm looking for a PhD. And my question is about that in the first Trump administration, there was a policy called China Initiative that was directed to detect and catch cases of military and academic espionage. And at the same time, in Australia, there were also many cases of United Front operations that were discovered. So United Front from the Chinese Communist Party. And in both countries, I saw that, especially in the US, the China Initiative, it received a lot of backlash because even if the threat or the situation was real, there were real cases of detected espionage in some especially critical technologies or policies. It was criticized because the policy, it persecuted people who were not involved in anything. Many people, researchers, scientists felt that they were just accused with a simple label of security clearance and that was it. And I don't know if now in 2026, Western states are more capable of doing this kind of assessments, or this was just in the Trump administration case, or now it's more possible to do this kind of detection and assessment.
Okay, so let me caveat my answer with the fact that I do not speak for the U.S. government. I will back that up with saying I worked for the U.S. government when the China Initiative was a thing, and I absolutely thought that it made no sense to put a tag on something like that. I thought that was very counterproductive because I thought it immediately, not only is it a bad look for the government because it looks like you're targeting a certain group of people, but I think it also makes a certain segment of your population feel like they're being persecuted or feel paranoid or feel less than, like they're not part of the group, right? They're not one of us. They're not one of it, they're not a full citizen or they're not a fully belong because this tag's been put on there. As far as the prosecutions that were involved, I don't know, I don't have any firsthand knowledge on any of those, but I suspect some of them were probably tossed out because of procedural issues. I hope in my heart that we didn't have people in the Department of Justice or in the FBI targeting individuals merely because of their ethnicity. And then I would say currently, if I were talking to a university or an institution and I was helping them figure out how to manage risk in their research portfolio, one of the things that I would talk to them about is how to institute what's called a due diligence review process to kind of understand who your researchers are collaborating with. And the absolute first thing that would be on that list is you don't target individuals because of their ethnicity, period. So does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the common, I suppose, approach in the way that ethnicity should not be at all considered. But if I take the kind of northeastern corner of European Union as a little bit of an example, then when you have enough cases that a certain ethnicity has engaged into espionage, and through universities, for example, either a personnel espionage or in the way that they kind of, looked into the university and through that to companies and things like that. What more you have those cases, the more it starts to come that even if it's not said directly, it affects people's minds. And that obviously is the one that I don't think any government puts a label as such, but how it kind of penetrates into the cognitive, so to speak, when you have many cases of a certain ethnicity doing that, then there is an effect. Obviously, it's not a government degree or a recommendation or any of that, but when you are applying to a university, for example, a student from the big country in the East, that might be rejected just because of that, due to the fact that there are certain cases that kind of bad experience. And it's kind of like, no, we need to get over that experience. We don't dare to, because then we need to go into the security clearance aspects and da-da-da-da. That's even a discussion now, as far as I know, that both kind of, even in university, staff, researchers, even some cases a question on master students to do a security clearance. This is unheard of 10 years ago that we would even talking about that. But that has affected. So it is a valid question and very not a good answer necessarily, although official and unofficial lines.
Maybe we can take several. We make a final round. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Giuseppe Ibanez from Pompeu Fabra University. Thank you for your insights. I think we need them. We've been quite naive for a long time in many universities. And let me throw a question on the other side of the coin. We assume somehow that there is an alignment between the people, the government, and universities. What's the role of universities when such alignment is weak or is broken? We've seen some situations in which this link has been weakened in Europe and in the US, and universities are institutions of critical thinking, independence. How do we deal with such dilemmas, especially in these cases where these dilemmas arose?
Thank you. Yes.
Vanessa Daza, also from Pompeu Fabra University. So my question is somehow related also, of course, coming from the university, from Giuseppe one, and is, I think it's very nice to have such an expert so that you can maybe suggest how to, so we have professors, so how can we explain them that things are not as they used to be before? And you know that this naive approach that Giuseppe was mentioning, or maybe that, this innocent version maybe has changed, and I mean, maybe no, it is. So any suggestion, approach, how to deal with that without panicking our professors, without stopping research, because this is the future. So thank you.
So if I may, the first question, when you say not in alignment, can you be a little bit more specific what issues maybe they're not in alignment with the government, the institutions, and the citizens?
When universities feel that the government is interfering with very basic fundamental rights which are defended by universities.
Okay. See, that's an interesting question. So, as I'm sure a lot of folks, I'm sure it makes the news over here that some of the struggles that the universities in the U.S. have had with the current administration. And my answer to your question would be the institution, I think, should stand up for what they believe is right. That, academic freedom, freedom of collaboration, et cetera, as long as that particular issue doesn't violate any laws in the country or doesn't put folks in jeopardy, things like that. It's easy for me to say that I think institutions ought to do that. I got to tell you, I'm proud of Harvard for what they've done in the U.S., truly. I mean, granted, they've got a huge endowment, so they've got a little more leeway there than some institutions. I would hope that academic institutions if they're truly dedicated to the ideas of the academy, that if they're seeing that kind of a situation, that they're calling it out in a respectful, courteous fashion, but nonetheless calling it when they see it.
Yeah, again, interesting, because I understood immediately that one. Plus, that I read, because you said people, university, and government. So first, the governments are meddling with the university thing, but then people do not believe anymore what universities, so the expertise aspect. So I read your question kind of that way. And that, of course, is, again, if I would know what exactly need to be done, perhaps that some others would know that too. But that exactly is the time when we're talking about the change of dynamics and transition periods, and everything is kind of on the move, and then there are those outside actors who start kind of meddling into it. So the things happen. Also, universities have gone a bit kind of like trying to protect yourself. And this, we know that debunking doesn't work for people. So to find the ways, first I'm answering this people, university, to try to find the ways to perhaps open up a bit, to come up with the ways of how the conversation, and not that it would deepen the people and universities, the elite. Perhaps in some ways, yes, but it can be, elite should be humble. You can be elite, but you should be humble. So to find that, and then with the kind of a government one, is again, there I would say that yes, stand up, but also have a more dialogue on the fact that what exactly is in their view then the thing that we're doing wrong, and why, and perhaps then find arguments to how to go against. And same goes almost to how to explain then, because that is exactly the thing that to give kind of the context of what is happening, that this is transition. We have had in history a lot of transitions in Europe and in the world and things like that, and they always challenge us one way or another. And usually they look really bad in the beginning when there is that kind of a, how do we get over this? How do we survive? What is in the end of it? How is it going to change our labor markets? How is it going to change this and that? That's what we're living. I started with the, what did I say, age of openness, age of innocence, and now perhaps age of kind of uncertainty, or something like that. And then finally I would say that to understand authoritarian strategic culture would be really important. That subject should come in every university, because that has a certain aspects that we would need to understand when we read the news and information and engage critically and things like that. So deeper understanding on authoritarian strategic culture, in general strategic cultures, would be then the second one to propose.
Okay. Yes, there. That's the last one, or one, there were two. I take the two of them, yes. But first.
Hi, so my question is based around how do we think we approach misinformation, and kind of how do we approach companies like Meta or like Digital Service Act, kind of like what routes are the best way to kind of control misinformation beyond like university?
There is a second question and final, okay. Yes.
Hi, thank you. You have addressed at length industrial espionage, economic espionage, and these topics, but I feel like there's another subject that's connected to this, and I wanted to hear your opinion on it, and that would be election interference, and more specifically, how to prevent or counter election interference efforts. Some of these efforts conducted by Russian intelligence are very, very well documented and very well known. Just in recent years, there are countless examples among the West, the 2016 US elections, the Moldovan elections a couple years ago, Romanian presidential elections 2 years ago. These are all elections where there has been documented Russian interference. We can discuss the effect of these or how influential they were, but my question would be, and it connects strongly to the previous question, is that
it's the final round.
Exactly, is that
we have to finish at 8.
How, in your opinion, what would be a more effective toolbox of countering these espionage attempts or influence attempts? Thank you.
1 minute each.
Well, so the young lady, I'm sorry, the misinformation, you said Meta, and you said what can universities do?
Control information.
How do we manage like social media companies and corporations who are playing a big role in misinformation, I guess?
How could universities play a role in that?
Or just like,
Anyway.
I guess beyond the university side.
So this will be my opinion, I guess. This won't be an expert opinion, but this is a slippery slope. But I think governments should have a role and some responsibility in identifying what information is being put out to the public, the mass public that's dangerous, wrong. If they're able to articulate that. The slippery slope, I see it, is A, people don't trust their government, so they're not going to believe them, and or B, then the governments can start narrowing that aperture as they go. There's not a good answer for that. Again, that to me, I've got an 18-year-old daughter. I would certainly, if something was coming out over TikTok or whatever that I thought was really bad, and the government knew what was behind it, I'd certainly want them to tell me so I could tell her. But I know that's probably not a realistic option.
Okay, for that one, in this minute, the public-private partnership that we have touched upon, also kind of when it comes to critical infrastructure and other entities, comes down to this one as well. And the engagement there and the discussion and rules of engagement and behavior, those are the ones that one can say in this 30 seconds for your question to answer. And then the second one, and the election interference. So because behind the hybrid threat mechanism to do all kind of devious things and try to push your own agenda is also the goals of undermining democracy and getting your own, possibly getting your own person then elected. Both are fine outcomes. And that's again, what can we do about it is that we have discussed here that Moldova had actually a rather good mechanisms in place when you already understand that in early stages. So there are lots of things, but I still continue repeating myself in this, the critical understanding, the knowledge-based from the school. How do you take the information that is around you and the context, where to connect everything? That will help. And then finally, the authoritarian strategic culture to understand that we actually want to live in democracy and not in an authoritarian country.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for sharing your thoughts and your experience, and thank you very much on behalf of the IEN.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Moltes gràcies a tots per ser aquí, per la vostra intenció, per les preguntes i fins d'aquí un any. Gràcies en nom de l'IEN. Adéu-siau.